Hello everyone, and welcome to Christian Emotional Recovery, the YouTube channel. I'm your host, Rachel Leroy. I also run a podcast that you may be familiar with, also called Christian Emotional Recovery. And the podcast and the YouTube channel are for people in emotional recovery, whether that might be from different forms of abuse or trauma, childhood emotional neglect, narcissistic abuse, childhood emotional abuse, and other forms of abuse and trauma. So keep in mind that this podcast and this YouTube channel are for the survivors. And so I'm here to represent you. So I try not to be biased, but I'm here to advocate for and to champion and to support people like you, because there's just been too much in our society, in interpersonal relationships, in families and institutions, and even in the church, where people have been abusing and harming other people and they get by with it. And on top of that, there will be gaslighting, denial, and cover-up that just re-traumatizes the victim or the survivor. And I am here to help you to find your footing, to empower you, to educate you, to teach you about strategies you can do to heal, to teach you about strategies you can do to get your life back, and to protect yourself and to be able to support others in the process as well. It is such an honor to be able to go on this journey with you and to be able to help you to heal and to be able to be part of your healing journey. So thank you so much for following the podcast and the YouTube channel. It's a labor of love. And if you would like to support it, I'll be honest, I struggle with a lot of the time and the energy and the money that comes into putting up the podcast and the YouTube channel. And one way you can help this to continue to be able to be possible, to ease the process for me, to help me cover expenses, because I do pay, I don't know exactly how much, probably a couple $100 a month to put in expenses to the podcast. And that doesn't count the time I'm putting in place of doing a regular job. I do work a part-time regular job. I'm trying to build a business and I do this. So it's a lot. And the business is partly to be able to try to support the podcast. And I'm hoping that it will take off eventually, but I'm trying to figure things out right now, and I'm struggling a little bit, but I'm not giving up. But if you want to support it and make this continue to happen, if you want to help other survivors like you, then you can go to the Patreon account. I'll put a link below, and you can support anywhere from $5 a month, a monthly donation, all the way up to $25 a month or even more. And you can also go to the Christian Emotional Recovery store. There's a meditation bundle there you can get, where you can get that and use the A.C.O.R.N meditations for healing difficult emotions anytime you want, whether you're online or not. They're yours forever. You own them. And also, I will be adding more resources to the store, and I want to expand that eventually to help fund the podcast and, quite frankly, to help me to be able to make a living and continue to do this at the same time. And thank you so much for understanding and following me on this journey. It's such a privilege. I'm so grateful for you. And if it's helpful, you think that this will be helpful to somebody, refer them to the podcast, refer them to the YouTube channel, share the meditations with them, whatever you feel like might be helpful for them, because this is the whole point, is to be able to help people like you, because I have reached out for resources and they weren't there. And then when I started figuring out what was going on with me after trying to heal for 20 years and not having any insight as to what was really going on, and using all these resources that weren't really helping me that much, I found some resources that did. And so I decided I wanted to start doing this too, especially for the Christian community, because it's often overlooked in this category. There's not a lot of resources specialized for Christians. And I want to teach Christians that it's okay to seek support and therapy and help, and to educate yourself, and to know that a lot of people will actually use your own faith against you to try to keep you in a situation that's actually harmful, and in some cases is even abuse. People will hide behind religious facades, in some cases even. And I mean, I wish it wasn't the case. I'm not being cynical, but sometimes it is true. People do that. And I'm sure you can think of examples of that you've seen in the media, and maybe you've even witnessed or experienced yourself. So one thing I wanted to do today was to go over 5 Facebook channels you need to follow if you're in trauma recovery. So the name of this podcast episode is 5 Facebook channels you need to follow if you're in trauma recovery. And this should be a pretty brief video compared to some of my others, but you'll have to forgive me if I'm not really good at pronouncing certain names. But the 5 that I wanted to go over today are Nate Postlethwaite. I think that's how you say his name, Nate Postlethwaite. And these are Facebook channels. Nate Postlethwaite, Dr. Glenn Patrick Doyle, Dr. Glenn Patrick Doyle, Shannon Thomas, I think she's a doctor, Dr. Shannon Thomas, Patrick Weaver Ministries, and also Lisa Romano, Nate, Doyle, Thomas, Weaver, and Lisa Romano. That's 5, okay? Now, keep in mind that some of these are Christian. Some of these are more like subtly Christian. They are a Christian ministry, but they don't necessarily just focus on those folks. These folks, I also try to keep mine broad enough that it can be helpful and supportive to other people. All people are welcome on this channel. All people are welcome to my videos and to my YouTube and to the all of the resources. That's why I'm here. I'm not here to just help Christians. I'm here to help anybody who needs it, no matter who you are. Okay? That's what I feel like God has called me to do. Okay? So, the channels. The first one is Nate Postlethwaite. It's Postlethwaite. And he calls himself a writer, survivor, sharing my thoughts on healing from childhood trauma and CPTSD via inner child work. So he really focuses on inner child work. And I follow him. I love his work. He's an advocate, a survivor, and a writer. He's got a page at called natewrites.com. And the main thing about him that I like is he posts these little these memes or these little mini blogs where he talks about being a survivor of trauma, and it validates your experiences and helps you to explore your experiences in different ways. And it's just so relieving and so validating to hear it from the point of view of somebody who survived it themselves. And let me just read a couple of examples just so you can get a sampling. I love his stuff. It pops up on my Facebook feed. I'll be just going through Facebook, and it's so encouraging just to read a lot of what he says. He's not a Christian author, but his writing is very helpful, and I think it's helpful for a broad audience. And he says it wasn't the trauma that made them stronger. It was healing from it. There was no choice in the healing. Strength birthed from a hypervigilance to survive isn't as beneficial as you think. So he kind of tells you the truth, but he also can be encouraging. Here's another one. Ooh, this one resonates. You are triggered by people who say, but they're your family, because they're blindly defending those that show no remorse while dismissing those that received the abuse. You don't owe anyone an explanation on who you protect yourself from. And those are a couple of examples of what he posts. You have to stop offering yourself in the depths of your story to people who haven't shown you respect. If they don't have the capacity to see you, they shouldn't get access to what's beautifully hidden behind your scars. And he has a program where couple of times a year he does an inner child thing, and it's like $100 and it lasts a month. It's really affordable. I haven't done it, but I've got myself on the list where I do want to do it soon. But that's one person that you can follow on Facebook that if you're a PTSD, a trauma, or an abuse survivor, he's a really good channel of a lot of great insights and encouragement and just things to think about, things to chew on. Okay, and that's Nate Postlethwaite, Postlethwaite. I'll try to put their links in your in the show notes, so look below and I'll put the links in. Now, I can't promise a year later that these will still be valid or active, but you can also Google them to find their work as well. The next one that I find very, very helpful is Dr. Glenn Patrick Doyle. Dr. Glenn Patrick Doyle, and his name is spelled the way it sounds, Glenndoyle. And he's a psychologist specializing in realistic, sustainable recovery from trauma. Okay, so that's who he is, but he's not stuffy and he doesn't just spout a bunch of terms at you and stuff like that. He's very down to earth. He's very much an advocate. He is very passionate about what he does. Now, I will warn you, His isn't specifically Christian either, but he does use some adult language. So if that's not your thing, just be aware of that. But I've found his posts and his insights so helpful. And his are a little longer. He puts these little mini blogs up several times a day, or at least once a day, and a couple times a day, and you can read them, and they just provide you with encouragement and insight and advocacy. And let me just read some of the titles, because his are a little longer, his posts. It says, "Is awareness really the problem?" Awareness. There's another, well, I think that might actually be a repost from somebody else. Dealing with uncertainty, feelings about how their life didn't go as planned, trauma responses suck. He talks about that. Here's a shorter one. Sometimes the fact that our struggles are rooted in trauma doesn't become apparent until a new trauma triggers us. The pandemic, for example, brought a lot of people face to face with past trauma that they didn't even realize had been impacting their mental and physical health for years prior. And his stuff is just so powerful. Here's another one. Our abuser might be dead or out of our life, but our nervous system isn't at all convinced it's over. The idea that it wasn't really about them, that our abuse was about us, was programmed early and reinforced often. It doesn't go away when our abuser takes their last breath. Ooh, yeah, in his stuff, it hits you right in the gut, but it's like what you need to hear. You know what I mean? Let me find another one just so you can get one more example of Dr. Glenn Patrick Doyle. His tone is so passionate, and he is so an advocate for survivors. It's really powerful stuff. He says trauma survivors aren't trying to be annoying when we hit the "I'm sorry" button again and again. The thing is, part of us is honestly, truly convinced that if we don't apologize for taking up space or for inconveniencing someone with our existence, we're about to get hurt. Yeah. That's what he says. It's another one. Lots of us weren't born into a tribe. Lots of us only found our tribe through searching and guessing and experimenting and risk-taking and reinventing ourselves. For lots of us, it took years. For some of us, it took years before we even knew and had the option of finding our tribe. So it just keeps on, and there's like all these conversations in the post where people discuss things and just share their experiences and support one another. So he doesn't really have a group per se that I'm aware of. It's a page, but you can interact with the other people, and they understand the kind of things you've been through. He says in another one, this is the last one I'll share of his, maybe it's not entitlement that makes people think who were neglected as kids preoccupied with attachment. It's not needing to feel special. It's that overwhelming anxiety that if we're not special, valuable, entertaining, attractive, whatever, that will be abandoned. So I would read this stuff and just let it sit with you. It's like, whoa. Most of his stuff is a punch in the gut. I will warn you, it's a punch in the gut, but it's powerful and it's validating and it's healing and it's helpful. I adore his page. So another one that I recommend is Shannon Thomas. Shannon Thomas is an owner and lead therapist at South Lake Christian Counseling. And she doesn't post as much, but what I would recommend is you check out her book, Healing from Hidden Abuse. That book changed my life. And that is literally what put me on the path to the trauma healing journey, the whole thing. It started there. If it weren't for her book, I wouldn't be here. And that's just the plain and simple truth. I was on the healing journey, but I didn't know anything about trauma and how narcissistic abuse, psychological neglect, and stuff like that played a role. I didn't even know what that was. And her book, Healing from Hidden Abuse, changed my life. So I'm adding her to this, even though she doesn't post as much. She will repost stuff from other people, and there's a lot of helpful stuff there. And she'll also post her own stuff, maybe once or twice a week. But let me just read a couple of hers. Survivors of trauma must stay out of the comparison trap. It does not help. It does nothing but rob us of the contentment and joy we've worked so hard to cultivate. And then another one, as survivors of relational abuse, we're told we don't matter. Sometimes these words are spoken outright, and other times the behavior of the abuser sends the same damaging message. Survivors of trauma must live with intentionality to show themselves they do indeed matter. So it's about self-advocacy. And this one, for some reason, hers is right up my alley, right up what I experienced, and it hit the nail on the head. You know how you sort of listen to something or read something and you're like, it kind of, but something's off. Hers hit the nail on the head. So check out her book, her books, especially Healing from Hidden Abuse, if that's your situation. And I listened to that book 3 times when I first heard it, and I'm going to go back and listen to it again soon. But Shannon Thomas is another good one, and she is a trauma survivor advocate and a therapist. Okay, she's great. I love her work. Another one is Patrick Weaver Ministries. This is a ministry. It is a Christian ministry, and it's the Facebook page of Patrick Weaver, and it says Faith with a Dose of Realism, Transparency, and Compassion. And he actually talks about trauma and abuse and survival, and he focuses especially on interpersonal relationships, but especially romantic relationships and marriage. And I believe his story is that his father heinously abused his mother, and he witnessed that, and it had a deep impact on him. And there are far too few, sorry, my cat, you might hear her and see her. There are far too few people in the church that are advocating for the victim instead of the abuser. And there's far too few people standing up, and there's far too few people advocating. And he is one of those few people. He has a ministry, he has a church, he has a lot of followers, and his stuff is powerful. He does daily scriptures for everyday deliverance, and it's called Deliver Us Daily. He has an Instagram, a Facebook. You can go to his website. He does have like a separate church and ministry. He's got some stuff on YouTube, but more of his stuff is on Facebook, and he posts there several times a day. He's got these little mini blogs, kind of like some of the others. They're actually article length, and so I can't read them, but he advocates for the victims, and he talks about how it's scriptural, that people use and twist and manipulate scripture to try to keep people in relationships that are abusive and harmful, and even marriages that are very abusive, that there's still a lot of churches that advocate that. And he shows a biblical interpretation that indicates that God would never want us to be in a harmful, severely harmful or abusive relationship, and that we should not be advocating to keep people in those situations, and that it's ungodly and unchristlike to do so. And in my opinion, there are people that disagree, but in my opinion, I think he's spot on, and I think he's right. If you look at the spirit of the scriptures, if you look at God's spirit, and you look at the spirit of Christ, and you look at this stuff from that angle, instead of reading Christ through the lens of the Bible, and through the reading about love through the lens of the Bible, if we start using Christ and love as our lens to read the Bible, you see the difference? If we use it that way and reverse them, you start to look at things a little differently. And I think that the problem with a lot of interpretations these days is that people read Christ through the lens of Scripture instead of reading Scripture through the lens of Christ. Okay, Christ is the first thing. Love God with all your heart. Love other people. That's the first commandment. I'm not a preacher, okay? I'm not a theologian. But to me, if you're loving people, you may need to tell them things they don't want to hear for their own good, but you're also upholding their dignity and their agency and their safety and their mental health. It doesn't mean you're always going to say things that make them happy, but you are concerned and you care about their well-being. All of it, holistically. And Patrick Weaver Ministries does just that. Like I said, it's so long, I can't read one of his. I'll just read like one. It says, sis, if a man tells you he wants a wife who submits, tell him you want a husband who submits. It's stuff like that. Ephesians 5:21, which is the foundation of Scripture. So he uses Scripture to back this up. For the marriage covenant clearly establishes submission as mutual, reciprocal, and required both equally. And I've been seeing some Facebook pages where there's this resurgence of it's one way, of women should submit to men, but men have no responsibility to their wives. It goes both ways, people, okay? I'm sorry, it does. It's biblical. Read it. If you don't believe me, read Ephesians, and it's there. So I'm not trying to be political or anything like that. I'm just saying that we need to take the most compassionate and solid, compassionate interpretations of the Bible. If we're going to look at the Bible through the lens of love, we need to interpret it that way. Okay? That's just all I'm saying. And then he reads the scripture and talks about it and talks about mutual submission. There's another one where, see, he's got all kinds of posts, but he talks about, like, he calls out other ministries that are causing harm. I don't like getting involved in controversies. I really don't. But I'm starting to see that I'm going to have to be more vocal about certain things because people are falling for this stuff and it's reinforcing abuse. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. I debated with myself about whether or not I was going to talk about this, but I am. And then another one he says is sometimes you have to give people two options. Respect your boundaries or be removed from your life. I know this sounds harsh, but you have to honor yourself, your peace, and your sanity. The abuser, taker, and boundary breaker is quite all right with you abandoning your peace, suffering in silence, and going along to get along, but that's not your assignment. You are better Christian because you are not a better Christian because you allow someone to dishonor, disrespect, and deplete you. Your peace is so valuable that Jesus said, if the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. Your peace is not negotiable. If they cannot honor your peace, Jesus said, let them honor your absence. I love it. I absolutely love it. So this is not an absolute, but Patrick Weaver is an advocate for the disenfranchised. He does not stand up for the bully. He stands up for the survivor. And that is what we're all about here. It's not an us versus them thing. I know that. It's not that simple, but that's another one. Another one that you might check out is Lisa Romano. Lisa A. Romano. Her work changed my life. She's not a Christian influencer. She does post some spiritual stuff I don't necessarily agree with, but her work is really good. It's really helpful, and you can use that filter to know what you can choose to reject and what you choose to accept. But another one that has helped is narcissistic abuse survivors. Is Lisa A. Romano, and you can find her on Facebook. Her YouTube channel is second to none. She's got a great YouTube channel. She covers everything you can think of when it comes to survivors, relationships, narcissistic abuse, adult survivors of alcoholics, codependency, all that stuff. So check out Lisa Romano, Romano. Now, I wanted to talk about something that is a little more controversial, and I hope this doesn't get me in trouble with my followers, but I have to say it. I don't like it when preachers go back and forth condemning and judging and tearing each other down, saying, well, your doctrine's different than mine, so you're a false teacher. A false teacher is not somebody whose doctrine is is a little bit different than yours. It's somebody whose doctrine is a little bit different than yours. It doesn't make them a false teacher. Somebody who is a completely false teacher teaches something completely and entirely different. I don't like calling names, but there are certain ministries I follow and I like. There are certain ministries I scratch my head of and they have some good things. There are some ministries I disagree with a few things that they say, but I think overall they're a good ministry. In my opinion, Joyce Meyer is one of those. I don't agree with everything she says. I wish she was more trauma informed. She preaches too much of the prosperity gospel, but at the same time, I can understand why that appeals to some people. I follow Joseph Prince, same thing. I love him because he's very Christ-centered. He uses scripture to back up everything he says. I'm not telling you what to think or what to believe or who to follow or who not to follow. That is between you and God. You've got to read scripture, pray, and discern on your own. That's not my job. I'm not here to do that. This is not what this Facebook channel is about. But there are some ministries that I found that preach stuff that is so out there and so outrageously pro-abuse that I have to say something, and I feel it in my conscience and my responsibility to do so. And, I know that there's this debate. If you know anything about theology, if you know anything about Christian history, there's this debate, even now in the church, some of it is political, between complementarianism and egalitarianism. I won't get into the details, but it's about how two spouses, usually a husband and a wife, interact in their roles. Complementarianism is more traditional, where the wife stays at home, she makes beds, she cleans houses, she's her husband's helpmeet, she takes care of children, she has children, she supports her husband, she does things behind the scenes at church, and that's her role. And she's to submit to her husband, and he's the head of the house, and he goes out and makes the money, he earns the bread, he provides more of the discipline and the guidance and the authority in the home, he guides the sheep, so to speak, of the family. That's complementarianism. And then you have egalitarianism. And I'll be honest, maybe because of my experience, I'm an egalitarian. There's nothing wrong with being a complementarian. There's actually scriptures that support both sides. So I'm not about bashing complementarianism. The only thing that I have an issue with is it needs to be by consent from both adults, and they both need to want and be willing to do it. Nobody loses their agency. Nobody's putting anybody else down, and both parties have an equal say in the marriage, even if there's certain times and places where that's said and done. I get that complementarianism, this is a certain way it's done. Egalitarianism believes that the couple is equal, they submit to one another, and this is just my interpretation of it. They love and respect and cherish one another. They play equal roles in the family, in the home, in their ministries. Maybe the roles are different. Maybe the wife is a minister, maybe the husband's a minister, but they're equal and they have equal say, and they're entitled to different opinions in public. And maybe the wife works and the husband works and they have children, or they don't have children. Maybe one of them stays home. Maybe the husband stays home. You won't find that much in complementarianism, but egalitarians do have a more, I don't like to use words that charge people politically, but they have a more recent view of how things are. And so egalitarianism is more about the well-being of the individuals and the dignity of the individuals regardless of their gender, and that there might be certain things that are different between men and women, and there might even be, but they share the roles in a way that works for them, and that can vary in any way possible, and submission is mutual, and they're equal, and nobody's the head, but everybody is equal under that umbrella, okay? So that's another interpretation. Please don't come at me with scripture saying, well, da 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 da. I'm just sharing the different points of view, okay? So I'm not here to debate anybody, and I'm not going to debate anybody. That being said, I'm setting a framework here for one ministry that I think is harmful, and like I said, I'm very hesitant to post it, but I have to say something. I have to speak out. I've actually been blocked by this page because I spoke out. I was not rude. I was not disrespectful. All I did was express a different opinion. And this person is they don't even allow a difference of opinion on their website. If you challenge their opinion, they will block you everywhere. And this Facebook page is called The Transformed Wife. Watch out for that ministry. The woman may mean well. Her name is, what's her name? Lori something. And she preaches something that makes complementarianism look like liberal. It makes it seem liberal. Does that make sense? So she is not just preaching traditional complementarianism, which is fine. It's a different view than what I hold, but it's fine because I like to be open-minded about different interpretations within mainstream Christianity. I've said that before. Hers, however, she says that women should be submissive to their husbands. Women should not go to college. If you don't believe me, look it up. Women should not be educated. Women cannot preach under any circumstances to another man. or in any situations, and yet that's what she does. She says what she's doing is a Facebook ministry, but then she calls out other people like Joyce Meyer and Lisa Turkhurst and a lot of other wonderful women you may listen to, and some of them don't even stand behind a pulpit. They're on Facebook and they write books and they may give talks, and yet what she does is somehow different, but what they do is preaching. It doesn't make any sense. It's very, I'm just going to say it, hypocritical. And like I said, form your own opinion of her. I'm not telling you what to think of her, but she condones abuse as well. She doesn't just tell women not to go to school, not that they don't need to use birth control. Don't use birth control. If you choose not to, that's your choice. But she's saying, hands down, no woman should use birth control. She thinks that women should not be equal to men. She thinks that women should subdue themselves for men, and that men are just gross, childish animals that can't control themselves, and men should not be responsible at all for how a woman reacts to them, but a woman is completely responsible for how a man reacts to her. Okay? It's mutual, in my opinion. I think that goes both ways. We're both responsible for making sure our spouse or our partner in how we conduct ourselves around them, but they are also responsible for their own behavior and their own urges. And she's actually condoned if a woman says no to her husband and he does something to her without her consent, she thinks that's okay. She thinks that's okay. And I'm just going to leave it there. I'm just saying that that's the kind of ministry, those are red flags you want to look out for. If it condones abuse, if it condones putting us into Sharia law, but it's just Christian, red flags, danger. That's all I'm saying. Her ministry is the kind you don't want to follow, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. Whether or not her stuff should be taken down, I don't know. People have a right to their opinions, but a lot of what she does promote condones. It borders on outright abuse and outright torture for some people. She tells women to stay in marriages where they're being abused. She's like, if you're physically abused, you can leave. But if you're being emotionally abused, you need to try to work it out. That's complicated. Every situation's different. But overall, if somebody is heinously emotionally abusing you, it's no less than if somebody's physically abusing you. It can cause just as much harm. So, Transformed Wife is just one to look out for. I'm just letting you know about it, and just a kind of thing you want to look out for with red flags, in my opinion, when it comes to some of these channels. That's all I'm saying. So that was 5 Facebook channels that you want to follow, or you could follow on Facebook. I'm not saying you should or you have to. I'm saying that they might be ones you would consider depending on where you're at in your journey and what your views are. And then I also named one that, in my opinion, causes harm and open harm. So that's just my opinion, but there it is. So that podcast was 5 Facebook channels you need to follow if you're in trauma recovery. And some of them are Christian, some of them are not. As always, use discernment. Don't come at me and say, oh, well, you're recommending stuff that leads people away from God and all that. That's not the point. The point is that you need to find healing, and that you can do that with different resources. And I believe God can use Christian and non-Christian alike to do so. It's good to find stuff that's Christian, I do agree. But there's still a lot of lack of resources, and a lot of these people, just because they're not calling themselves Christians, who knows if they are? They might be a Christian. How do we know? Everybody doesn't always go around labeling themselves that way. And even I debated about whether or not to call this Christian emotional recovery. I did debate it, because it's how you live that matters, not what you label yourself as. That shows who you really are. So check out those Facebook groups and Facebook pages, and follow the ones that you feel like will be helpful to you. I hope this has been helpful to you. Thank you so much for listening. Check out my YouTube channel. Hit subscribe on this if you haven't, to get unique material you can't get on the podcast. Check out the podcast. I'll put all the stuff in the show notes. If you want to support this ministry, check out rachelleroy.podia.com, where there's a store, writing store for writing courses, and also a store for trauma survivors. And also check out ChristianEmotionalRecovery.com, and check out the Facebook group also called Christian Emotional Recovery. Thank you so much for following me, and thank you for listening. Remember, beloved, you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and God loves you.